So
You want to kick it
Jessica,
off
you
or you
want
want
to
me
tee
to
us
jump
up?
in?
Mm-hmm.
Me? Okay, I'm going to go for it. So, welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here. A lot of you probably don't know me. Oh, were you supposed to go, Beth? Did I misunderstand? No? Okay. So most people probably don't know me. My name is Jessica Rose. I'm the Associate Director of Analytics and Communications, way down tucked into the facilities unit, which is maybe transitioning to sustainability, facilities, and safety, or maybe we'll stay facilities and that'll be on top of us. I don't know. But we are in the administration and finance side of the fence, so non-research, non-academic. And I've been on campus for 6 years, January 15th. Um, I very early on in my role, I started in communications, but was kind of engaged in inquiries coming over to facilities. There would be these random inquiries. I think at first my boss thought it was kind of PR. So he's like, oh, she can handle that. And a lot of the inquiries were coming from the research side of the house of, hey, can we put this sensor or meter up here? Or, ooh, we heard you guys have heavily metered buildings. Could we get some energy data? Um, just all kinds of any question you could think of, anything related to living learning lab and the built environment and leveraging it for research was coming through me. And at the time, I hadn't had a background in higher ed, so I was having to ask a million questions. I found out that I had a colleague already working with members of IPAT on utility data. I'll go over that in a minute. And just started learning a whole lot in a very short order. But really, I also became very passionate about this unique opportunity to kind of overlay operational data and outcomes with researchers, with academia. So for the last several years, I've been working with lots of people who, a couple of them are going to join today in the discussion, to figure out how we can be more purposeful in making certain types of operational data more readily available for the research and academic community. What would be the benefits of these types of things? What would be the resources required? So it's been an uphill battle, but over the last few months, we, with Beth's support and Tim Lewin's support from the Strategic Energy Institute, we were able to kick off what we're calling Data as Asset Task Force. That task force reports up to Kelly Fox, who's the Executive Vice President of Administration and Finance, and Dr. Abdallah, who everybody knows, to kind of try to outline, at least for network data and utility data on campus, what would it take to really get that data more readily available for research accessibility. So that's our current task at hand, and that's how I ended up here today, is we're looking forward to listening to the feedback that you all might have to share with us on what type of value this asset could bring to the research community. So we're going to set it off with a couple of slides, just setting the stage, and then we've got three folks who for different reasons are joining. We've got Russ Clark is going to join in the conversation. Most people probably know Russ, the Director of Mobile Technology and IoT Programs. He's on the call. We've got Matt Sanders, Research Scientist and IPAT's Director of Research Operations, and then Scott Duncan, who's a Senior Researcher for the Aerospace Systems Design Lab. And Scott's been working in partnership with us over in facilities for several years on a Smart Campus initiative. So those three are going to kind of help color the conversation, but we want this to be an open dialogue. So a couple of minutes of introductions and setting the stage, and then we're going to open it up. So without further ado, I'm going to share a couple of very quick slides to help set the tone here. And these slides are from my perspective. They're probably not comprehensive of really what's gone on. I'm sure everybody has a different story about how campus data has colored some work that you've done. But as it relates to my experience and kind of working with IPAT, you can see in 2014, there was a utility data API written that then broke after a couple of years because it didn't have good support. SEI's 5-year strategic plan sets a goal to make campus energy data easily accessible in 2018. From 2015 when I started until last year, and I wrote this at mid-2020, we saw a 32% increase in our requests coming in for data. So on a weekly basis, we get 2 to 5 requests sometimes. There's some down weeks, but it's pretty intense, and we don't always have the ability to provide that data out, and it's very disappointing, right? As a research-oriented school, we want to make that more available. And then in 2018, I was officially placed as kind of the ASDL research shepherd to help connect the ASDL team who were working under Steve Swant to our data and to our operational outcomes. So I kind of act as a facilitator. And then now I'm chairing this data as asset task force. So what we pitched essentially to Dr. Abdallah and Ms. Stokes were if you could mute your phone, I can hear your dogs. Puppies talking away. Thank you. So what we pitched was, we believe that operational data can be a shared asset to the campus community. There's improved outcomes on both sides of the fence, applied learning outcomes. But right now, operational data can be difficult to get to. It's not always well organized. It's not always set up for the researchers to access. We know there's going to be cost to resource it appropriately, and we want to really think about the long-term opportunities to activate. And I say, the asset, but there are multiple assets. And really the end goal that we need to be thinking about, I think, as an institute, is how to leverage this to meet interoperability, right? We don't want to forget about the ANF goals and operational needs of why we were collecting this data in the first place, but we also don't want to miss an opportunity as Internet of Things grows and scales, and just megs and megs of data are being collected. How can we get it more organized and really get this in the hands of the research community more quickly to move forward applied research? And then the instructional community has tons of opportunity, right, to give these students the hands-on outcomes when they see real data and real subject matter expertise. That kind of sets the stage. From there, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open it up first, I think, over to Scott. Scott, I prepped you a little bit, Scott Duncan. What I'd love if you could share, a blip of what ASDL is doing, and then from your perspective, what's working well with your access to data and maybe some of your challenges.
Sure thing, Jessica, and thanks everyone for the forum here. Actually, and let me know if you hear background noise. My kids are watching the NASA live feed, so they may hopefully be cheering in about 10 or 15 minutes. Boy, it's been maybe 7 years ago we were first invited. First a little bit about me. So I'm part of the research faculty here. I'm a member of the Aerospace Systems Design Laboratory, and under the director, Dimitri Mavris. And our lab is very interested in large-scale systems, usually infrastructure, physical systems, but all these days those always have an overlay of some kind of cyber-physical aspects, data models, etc. And we're very interested in big systems with lots of moving pieces and how those are architected and designed and operated. And for some time we had been doing research with the Navy, looking at a future battleship that had its systems, which generate a lot of heat, cooled by chilled water systems. And this was a little bit before my time here, but supposedly this work with the Navy went on for years, but we never saw a single piece of real data, right? Lots of great, models and methods and, architecting techniques, but we looked at chilled water systems for some time with no data. So our director, asked facilities, hey, it seems like, as we understand it, Georgia Tech has chilled water systems. Do you have data? We'd love to kind of figure out if that could be used in our models, if we could help you. And so that was really the first place we started. Not to get too much into the details, but Georgia Tech has a district energy system where there's central plants, one of which has the whistle, for example, that create chilled water, and that's sent around campus, and the buildings dump their heat into it, basically. So we started kind of from that really broad perspective, and we're offered the chance to look at facilities data and see if we could help identify some low-hanging fruit in terms of efficiency improvements. And so one of the first things we did was just make actually facilities able to access their own data in a more streamlined way. Students were savvy enough with various web programming type tools, databases, to make tools that could query better than the original like OEM, systems for various types of metering. And so actually a lot of what I'll talk about today is about utilities metering, energy and water data. And so facilities, I think, discovered, as I understand it, that once facilities started using their own data more frequently, they saw that there was a pretty significant load on those IT systems, whether it was servers or networks and such. And so it seemed like there was a constraint to really having a lot of people look at this data at once. And so we were kind of relegated to helping facilities improve their operations, and where we could, see if we could scrape together some research. And I think the short story is the data was good enough to figure out where Georgia Tech had sore spots and could do better, but it was never really great enough or accessible in the volumes that could drive like deeper research. And honestly, we kind of proceeded in that mode for several years, and we're made the case for better standardization or better throughput, but really couldn't figure out how to make a business case to Georgia Tech to invest in those things beyond just better serving facilities. And shortly, I guess maybe 3 years ago, we were then told, well, maybe let's hold off on looking at the full campus and all of its metering and sensors regarding water and energy, and let's just focus on Candida, because this is an emerging area. There's real resources thanks to the Candida Fund to quote unquote do this right? Get all the data platforms funded, get people hired to establish them, curate them, have design commissioning teams. They're looking at the data, and so that should be a really great repository and maybe set of best practice. And just to skip to the point of that, it really is. It's still not perfect, but and I'll let Jessica talk to this. I think this is probably our best asset for looking at a single building on campus. We've been helping the Candida building get their data house in order, frankly, to be able to report to the Living Futures Institute, International Living Futures Institute, to certify Candida as a living building. And so there's been a lot of work just to get a top tier performing building to get its data in good shape. The good news, though, is that compared to a lot of existing facilities platforms, I think this one should be more scalable and accessible. So, part of what was contracted was to make that data available for research use. There is a preliminary site for accessing and using that data that I think more people will be able to hammer with different data requests soon. So now the question is, well, if we have this best practice, what can we learn from it? How can we scale outward to help Georgia Tech? And actually, the SEI had asked me for a few years, Strategic Energy Initiative, to kind of weigh in and figure out how this could be done. And to be honest, I couldn't quite crack that nut. Thankfully, Jessica and Tim from SEI and Beth from IPAT suggested that we have more people, a number of whom are on this call, to try to think about how to go big with data as an asset. So I don't know if, Jessica, that's a good segue. I can bore you guys to tears with all the ins and outs of data, and happy to answer your question. But that's kind of the quick story of what our research group's involvement has been. But to be honest, just briefly, every building on campus is a special flower. They're all different. They're managed by different people. They have different equipment, different data sets, different quality of data, belong to different networks. And to try to sort of think of every campus building, considered with a single standard on a single platform is doable, but it's daunting. So I'm happy people are focusing on how to do this, but it's really very difficult to say, well, we've done it for one building, we can do it for all of them. Let's just copy and paste. To some extent you can, but to get really great quality data, that's another step up. So I'm happy to answer some of the ins and outs of that. I think there's maybe an equivalent story on the networking side. I'd like to compare notes there. So
Yeah, I think I love the flower analogy because it's kind of how do we tend the garden, right? Like what can we put into place to kind of go from a crazy wild west garden to something that's a little more organized and we understand where our posies are, and how to get to them. But that also kind of brings up kind of the Internet of Things, right? Because some of the challenges that we have, frankly, get into the physical assets in the field. So you can set up a data architecture fairly easily. I mean, it takes a lot of forethought, but once it's set up, it's set up when you're just dealing with digitized information. But there is a whole area of these physical assets that are producing the data, whether it be sensors, meters, gateways, all kinds of fun things, and how to deal with the health of these physical assets. So, Russ, I'm looking at you because I know a lot of the work that you do every day is engaged in these assets in the field. I was wondering if you could talk to that as it relates to this idea of how do we get from there to here? This is going to be a growing area. You're helping us with EcoCommons right now. You're doing a lot of stuff out in Savannah. What do you see as the opportunity and the challenge of taking it from the physical asset in the field into something that's really useful for researchers?
Yeah, so thank you. That was a great, Scott. That was awesome history of that space and that project. And I'll give a little bit of history of how we got into this. And then, quite honestly, it has been in our DNA for many of us. This notion that Georgia Tech's operational capabilities provide an amazing testbed, an amazing resource of data for research, and for our students to do interesting projects. And Dave Leonard is on. I wish Ron Hutchins could be here because this goes back to my days as a student, quite literally, working in the network operation and the NOC and in the networking team. And the research that I did in grad school as a grad student, much of it would not have happened if I'd not had access to this kind of operational data. And Matt's going to say a little bit more, I think, about some of the networking things that are going on today. But this really does go back 25 years in terms of, there are people at Georgia Tech that think this is important and that have thought this is important, and that, quite frankly, we have been more than once. I can't even count all the times that we have been participated in recruiting new faculty and new researchers to come to Georgia Tech specifically because we offered this opportunity for them that they couldn't get anywhere else. So I just, I can't stress that enough, right? What a big, we call it the unfair advantage, right? That's a term, we've used a lot, is that this is one of Georgia Tech's unfair advantages in competing with other universities, right? And we should leverage it. So, but Jessica specifically mentioned the IoT space, which is certainly something that I spend a lot of time in now, and bringing here in Savannah the sensor technologies with the sea level sensor project, but also things like environmentals and air quality and weather and what have you, and basically researching how do we bring this new technology, the new networking technology, the new sensors that have longer battery life and reduced costs, so that we can do $300 to $500 and less installations instead of $10,000 sensor installations, and we can do that at scale. And then what do we do with all that data, and how do we QA QC it? How do we make sure it's useful for research? How do we document it? How do we make it available to researchers? How do we work through the issues of what's appropriate to be open to everybody and what's not, and all of that. And we're pretty super excited that with the Eco Commons coming online, I don't know if you all caught it, but I certainly caught it. In the statement from Dr. Cabrera yesterday was a full paragraph on, and there will be sensors and there will be data, and to which we all went, oh crap, we better get on that. No, the good news is we are on it, and it is well underway, and leveraging, quite frankly, the research that we're doing in Savannah and that we've learned about how to do this at scale, and then bringing it back to campus to get all those things like highly localized temperature and soil moisture and weather data, as well as even leaf moisture is one of my favorites, and combining that and building that out, not just in the EcoCommons space but to all of campus. And so it's it's neat work. It's a great opportunity to make that all available. Again, it's exciting for us because we've been living this ever since we put the first tracking locators on the trolleys in 2003 that sent messages via text messages because there was no such thing as a data plan. And all the way through today. And that example is a good one because we liked, we supported that project as research for a decade. But when we were doing it, we were the only place in the country that was tracking buses. And 10 years passed, and of course, there was no such thing as a bus service. That this is required. This wasn't a luxury. This was a required feature. And it was time for that to transition out of being a research project, and now it's a commercial application, and parking transportation, it's part of their offering, and the students, everyone expects it to work, and we don't support it, but that's okay. The data is still available, and the API, we work with the vendor to make sure the data is available with APIs still. So anyway, that kind of in a nutshell, my collection of stories, but I think the opportunity, to deploy the sensor infrastructure on campus has never been greater. But we also have to, figure out how to corral it a bit. Otherwise, we're going to have 20 sensors hang on every pole and tree, and we already have a little bit of that going on, and we have to figure out how to navigate that.
Yeah, if you want to watch the campus architects go crazy, let them walk past some of these poles, and they're like, "What is all this, Jessica?" And I'm like, "They're tagged. Don't worry, we have an inventory." Trying to assure them that it won't get. We will take care of it. Is part of the game right now. But it would be we're trying to think through how to standardize even that stuff, right? What does that inventory look like, and are these shared assets or not? I mean, there's so many things to think through. Matt, you want me to hand it over to you? I can prompt you, but I know you already have a million other things you want to say.
Yeah, I might take a little bit different a little bit different tack on this, which is so I've worked with everybody and a number of people. Everybody's talked, and a number of other folks that are here, and so a lot of folks have heard about kind of the different projects. And so I'll just quickly go over like the notable ones here. So when I was working with OIT as in the wireless space, so I was on the operations side working with researchers to get them data so that they could use it so this is the network data, but specifically wireless data. And so there's interest in, obviously looking at patterns, within a building or groups. So our Campus Life project that Gregory and Thomas and Munmun and others work on is actually has been leveraging that data to directly address student issues around mental health and wellness, as well as academic success. And so that's a different kind of angle on some of this. It moves away from the research about the facilities, and it moves in, really into a whole lot of other academic domains that's very interesting, and kind of using the data outside of what its original purpose, was as well. So as part of that, and so that team has also most recently been looking at things related to COVID, everything from how to deal with the flow of people in spaces when we start to reopen, to contact tracing applications, helping the contact tracers, things like that. And so what's interesting in this to me is you can think about this as, so if I go back to the task force work, if you can think about this as okay, if I'm a data architect, I'm thinking about this from the point of view of we need a repository where we can store a lot of data. We need APIs. We need all the infrastructure pieces. I think what I see after our long history of dealing with this is that what's as important, if not more important, is that we figure out some of the systemic issues and structural issues around how people get access to data, because there's privacy concerns, there's data stewardship concerns, there's actual legal requirements around certain data that might be shared. So for any project that we mention, we could go through and talk about specific challenges that we've faced and how we've overcome them. I will say that almost all of these stories will come back around to someone like Jessica or Steve, who's on the operations side, who basically sees the value of working with researchers. And then I'll just say that they have to work within the system to figure out how to make it work. And that includes, resources and how those get done, and how you get approvals and all that kind of good stuff. And David's been on way more of these than I can even describe. So that's a piece of this that I suspect if we, when we start to talk about others, and I think we do want to open this up to others to say, what are some examples of data you've tried to get and roadblocks you've run into, data you would like to get and what value it would play, in your research. I think, that's really kind of where we want to kind of head with the rest of the discussion.
I absolutely agree. So on that, there was 2 questions that Matt just shared, and it was examples of data you've tried to get and maybe you've run into roadblocks, or data that you would really love to get, that you've laid in bed at night going, man, I know that somewhere somebody's collecting this. I've seen the sensors or I've heard about it, and if I could just get my hands on that. So we would love to hear commentary from you all as we're trying to think through this data as an asset and what we're presenting to the executive teams. What's going on in your worlds and what would be useful, or what stories do you have to share?
I would love to speak to that. Hi, Jessica. My name's Peter Presti. I'm a researcher in IPAT. I have been working off and on with a company doing research on elevators for the last 5 years. And one of the things that we really wanted to do was to, say, gather data in CODA, because it's one of the tallest buildings that we have, and gather data on the movement of the elevator cars going up and down. We also tried to grab the same data from the infrastructure side with in Synergy as well. But I understand that's not a campus building. But CODA, I understand, is maybe. Anyway, the biggest problem that we had weren't the technical side. It was the process, trying to figure out who to talk to get approvals from, and there being no clear pathway to trying to get these approvals. It was almost like an ad hoc process of people trying to figure out. And inevitably, we would either end up in a position where someone's weighing, well, what's the possible benefits versus the risks. And it almost always comes down to the risk outweigh the benefits for whoever is making that decision. And then there was one instance where we did get approvals, but it was like 3 months later. And after that, COVID had come into play, and we couldn't get any data anyway. So I think the most value that I can see moving forward is creating that process, identifying who can say, yes, this is a value, that the risks, that the benefits do outweigh the risks in providing this data, and having that process available to us as researchers.
Very helpful. Thank you. I'm curious, so you said you finally did get access to the data, but because of COVID, it's not useful. Do you still have access?
Oh, we got access. We got approval to work within CODA. However, the project's over, so I haven't pursued that since then.
Okay.
Yeah, this was like right at the cusp last spring.
Oh.
And was it actually access the data, or was it similar to what you did in Synergy, where you instrumented your own data collection within the elevator?
In that case, it was instrumenting the elevators, but it's a very similar process that goes through a lot of the same people. Now, we did ask to see if we get data in some of the other buildings, for example, TSRB early on. But again, TSRB, I don't think is under facilities, so they weren't very interested in helping us out. One of the challenges we had in that project is that we needed a large number of floors, and most of the buildings on campus didn't support that. I think CODA was the only one that would really work. Oh, that and the hotel. And we did get a response from the hotel that we could use it, but again, that was after CODA came into play.
Thank you for sharing.
I will say that at the time, no one wanted us to actually have access to the information coming out of their infrastructure systems. They were very concerned about us touching anything like that. But what they were willing to let us to eventually do is put our equipment in the elevators to collect data.
Fascinating. Who else has stories to share? I see you, Lou, and I know Lou has shared so much fascinating information.
I'm the oversharer.
It's been great, though. I read your documents still on a regular basis. Lou's put a lot of brain power into thinking about operational data as an asset, and I feel like you probably have a story to share or some thoughts here to shed light. Really, we're trying to think about what do we want to bring forward as value for what are we not thinking of right now? What academic outcomes are we not thinking about? What groups could be doing research? Kind of what you were touching on, Matt, that there's other things beyond just the buildings that can be learned from this data. So I would love to hear more thoughts around that, whether that's Lou or somebody else.
I think I think the thing we're missing, it's just opportunity cost, right? We don't know what we're missing because we don't have that data, and as a result, we've got a blind spot. So I guess that's sort of, to me, the most natural thing. It's arguing in that space, but I think it's definitely valid to say that we have a wealth. I mean, Georgia Tech's actually not any different than any other company, other institution, any other business. Everybody has lots of data. We should, you would think, be able to leverage ours better than the average institution or company. And we don't. So I think that what we're looking at is an opportunity lost, and will it turn into something that is a viably, valuable output for the Institute? That's a hunch, right? We don't know. That's what science looks like. You make a hypothesis and you test it.
Well, we've had some successful tests so far, lots of them, right? I think that's where we're all kind of feeling the pain now, is like, okay, we've proven this time and time again, but gosh, it sure is painful to keep going through all the same steps, to Matt's point. Matt, one of the other questions you asked is, what data would people like to see if they could get more data? When you think about everything it takes to operate the city of Georgia Tech, from soup to nuts.
I'll
Yeah.
mention, I'll mention, and maybe it'll prompt some ideas, but I mentioned the wireless data, uh, which we were successful in getting access to for the Campus Life project. But that team was also interested in getting academic data. And over the years, there have been a number of attempts, um, including students who wanted to develop applications using their data, their institutional data. And we have never really been able to crack that nut. To my knowledge, that we really haven't been able to do that. There have even been research relationships with companies that are in the space. There have been startups that have started, but the academic data itself, because of FERPA being kind of a third rail, and it being so close to the mission of the institute, that one has been elusive. Similarly, health center and some of the mental health related things has also been a challenge, even though we have environments where that type of data can live. There's some one of the things that's I guess two ways that those two types of data are the same. One is whether it's FERPA or HIPAA, but the other is there's some interesting privacy issues that pop up because we know the people in the sample, in the data sets, right? So, compared with situations where we get data from someone else and we're not very likely, or we, are very likely not to know anyone in those data sets, there's some interesting privacy things, and there's some challenges, right, to how we protect people's privacy. That said, the privacy thing can be solved, and we solve it, through other mechanisms with other projects. So, where there's a will, there's a way, I think, but it is a challenge.
Well, so everybody who's on the call, we have 28 people on today. Some of you joined a little bit late, but so you're aware, we have this task force that we've pulled together, and the two data sets we're trying to work on to really identify clear paths for our network data and campus utility data. Those are the two that we felt like we had, I wouldn't say low-hanging fruit, but lower. We had a lot of experience with on the team, on the members. So we felt familiar enough to know what some of the challenges were to overcome. But that's where we're focusing right now, and we hope to be presenting a strong plan for what we think it'll take by the end of the spring semester. So if you have an interest in that kind of data and you know that it could be useful to you, even if you don't want to speak out today, if you want to drop either me or Matt a line, we'd love to hear your story or what your challenges have been. So I know not everybody's always comfortable speaking out in an open forum, but those two particular data sets are ones we're working on actively right now. I want to make sure everybody's aware of that.
So I had a couple other questions just to toss into the mix. One is, this gets to Lou's questions or musings around opportunity cost, right? So it's a little hard to quantify what we can do if we haven't done it yet, but if we can't quantify it, we can't convince the people to put the resources so we can do it. So one thing that always works at Georgia Tech is to say, oh, but look at that competitive university over there and the data they've got and what they're doing with it. So, at one point Russ commented like we were the first ones instrumenting trolleys, but I don't think we're the only ones in the game now. So from your research communities or the people you interact with, what's happening at other universities or in other research groups that you think it would be helpful to remind folks that we're not the only ones contemplating this, and there's some interesting things happening on other campuses. And if it's happening in industry, so it can be like what's happening on University of Texas Austin's campus. It could also be like how Google is instrumenting their buildings or something like that, right? So I think that's all fair game in terms of research leadership. And then my other question was, Matt, especially with the Wi-Fi data, I recall lots of CIC teams that were like, this is what we would prototype. So there's also the kind of the student innovation side of this. Like, what are some of the ideas that we've seen where students are like, ooh, if we could get the Wi-Fi data, we can predict how long the lines are at all the Starbucks. I always remember that one. So anyway, I wanted to pose both of those questions out there.
Yeah, on the student innovation side of things, and just your experiential learning, in general, right? Access to data is a real differentiator. When we've been able to get teams access to real data, the quality of their prototypes and their work, their ability to convince people that it's that they've done something real, it changes, right? It informs things. And yeah, I think maybe we're far enough along now that this might be the first semester that Russ and I have taught the mobile apps class, and someone hasn't proposed, a way to access your data in T-Square, right? So the other interesting thing about access to data is that it does give the institute, when we think about what's the value to the institute beyond supporting research, it does give the institute a window into shortcomings in existing offerings, as well as a way to kind of encourage innovation, and what you do with that is a different, kind of a different area. But in terms of opportunity loss, I think I would consider that pretty large, especially since we don't have, on the operational side, we don't have a lot of money to throw around on innovation, right? I hear people talk about targeted innovation and kind of snicker, because that just means you have a very small innovation budget. Anyway, so it's, there's opportunity there if we can figure out a way to open things up.
Yeah, I would love to create like a review committee. In the sustainability world, some schools have created sustainability funds that students can apply for based on their project ideas. So why couldn't we essentially apply that same concept to these other innovative ideas that are related to the data they had access to, and then how they think they could make things better, right? And it takes a lot of thought, and there is the scary part of all these apps that then don't get supported in a couple of years. The fear from an operations perspective is we never want to build out our operations to be dependent on something that then we don't have someone to hold accountable later when something breaks, right? Mm-hmm. So, but I've always thought having this opportunity for these ideas to come forward, and the feedback loop with the subject matter experts say, that's a good idea, but here's why I, in my seat, think that won't work. Go back to the drawing board, or tweak it, in these ways. Take my input as the field subject matter expert. It's really like amplifying the concept of applied learning to a whole nother level, or not applied learning, applied research to a whole nother level. But you do have to officiate that process somehow, right? And you have to be able to say yes or no to different things, or our campus could just get crazy. But if we're serious about living learning laboratory, we're going to have to start thinking on those terms of like, not only getting access to the data, but then the ideas that are going to come up, how are we going to cull those ideas? How are we going to fund the potential for the innovation? There's so many cool opportunities, but we need you all. We need you guys to be excited about it too.
So Jessica maybe wasn't willing to call on someone, but I'm gonna put on the spot here. Unless he just disappeared. He just disappeared in my view. Did he drop? Still there? So Siva, with in the GIS space, I know you all have worked with both facilities and with space planning, and so I'm wondering, from your perspective, when you think about the challenges with working with campus data or the opportunities on, that it's given you on the research side, if you could share anything.
Thank you, Russ. So as you had mentioned that we are kind of the custodian, or a lot of the geospatial data assets from our campus footprint, from landscape related data elements and our green infrastructure data elements, some of those facilities data elements. Over the period, we have brought them into a common geospatial framework, which is leveraged for our planning purposes as our partners from capital space planning and facilities and real estate, office and housing. So a variety of different data layers, which we are capturing and maintaining it and providing it for both on the academic side and then for our consultants and contractors who come and work with the Georgia Tech on various different projects. And one of those projects is that we frequently highlight is our free assets on our campus. Starting in 2012, we needed to understand what our assets on our campus, because we needed to, our strategic plan at the institute level, we were aspiring to become a 50% canopy on our campus, but we didn't know where to start. We had an idea that we thought we have about 6,000 trees on our campus footprint, because our campus has changed in the last 20 plus years, essentially doubling the square footage of usage, and the enrollment have doubled, and a lot of older buildings have gone and new buildings have come in. The landscape has pretty much changed. I've been with Georgia Tech for 23 years now, and in front of my eyes, everything has changed. So with that in mind, so how do we know we are going towards that goal? Are we sustaining it? Are we going down? And we also needed to know some of those associated, Russ had talked a lot about sensors, and in the Eco Commons area that we are trying to measure and calibrate and understand how these systems interact with each other and so forth. So this is also playing a role in that. So how much rainwater are we really trapping within our campus footprint? How are we meeting with the City of Atlanta's mandates? And there are certain goals in the Eco Commons area and beyond. And we also had a stormwater master plan like several years ago, and we worked in developing that. I think we did like 1/3 of our footprint. We had a stormwater master plan on, and there's a little bit more. We haven't done that exercise. So the data, one of the things is not necessarily what we have for an asset at this time. The lineage of information, how did our landscape change from then to now? Knowing what is there now is one aspect. What was, and the comparisons is another thing that we are trying to kind of really get a good handle on. So if you had asked me, I can tell you that we have 11,324 trees as of January 31st, which is the active trees that are, providing canopy, providing shade, making our campus look beautiful. At the same time, it does a lot of things in terms of, how much carbon does it sequester, what's the air quality impacts on it. So we're able to quantify many of those things. And this data is also used in at least like 6 or 7 different academic class settings, from studying microclimate to an honors level classes that are undergraduate, understanding, tree population, food producing trees, and trees that are conducive for honeybee population and so forth. So let's give you an example of campus as a living laboratory, as Jessica mentioned. How does all these things kind of play a role in the collective advances of our institute strategic plans, including education, research, and operations and everything?
I would add to that what I'm seeing on the operational side is not enough connectivity. So Siva and his team, are a wealth of value, right? I finished my master's at Georgia Tech a year ago, and city and regional planning took just enough GIS courses to be dangerous, but also to learn the power of the tool and what could truly be possible if GIS was being leveraged to its fullest extent. And while I think lots of people on the ANF side are aware of this, I don't think that they truly know how to leverage it. And so figuring out how to standardize the feedback loops has been challenging, right? SEVA presents at a tree committee, SEVA presents when capital planning has a new project they want to talk about, but we haven't really officiated an ongoing reciprocal situation. Every year it's kind of like, well, are we doing this again? And, lots of people want to weigh in, and to me it's a no-brainer, but it is interesting to see how similar to the things we have to overcome around privacy and everything that Matt was talking about, I feel like we're having the conversation every year over and over again, SEVA, of why this is about you. Jason Gregory in capital planning gets it, I get it, but so many people above us don't, and it's like, are we just not articulating it appropriately? Like, how do we officiate this more? It's a no-brainer. We have some of the smartest GIS experts in the country right here on campus. We should be leveraging them more, right? I have heard it thrown around of leveraging researchers as more consultants.
So part of the reason, Jessica, is that if you look back like 10, 15 years ago, the facilities was deep rooted in CAD-based systems, and then the vast amount of knowledge that was garnered over the period. And then also leadership had different ideas, and they want to continue on the path that they were going, and the interoperability wasn't mature enough. But today, if we take 2021, the interoperability of systems are at a stage that could pretty much we can throw any data, any format, you can come out on the other side that, hey, I want to work on a spreadsheet, or I want to work on a CAD side, I want to work on a GIS. It doesn't matter. I think we are at that critical juncture where stitching together these technologies doesn't matter what these things are, but what is your objective? Your objective is to looking at the example that was mentioned, and I want to analyze these elevators going up and down in Coda building, and obviously all our data has some kind of a locational component. If you close your eyes and think about it, there ain't no data element that does not have a location component, whether it's explicit or implicit. So we have an opportunity to leverage that, connect it, and analyze it, and link it together. I think it is a collective effort for all of us, and everybody's got a stake in it. And so I'm all excited for these opportunities. And our colleagues in our group also work on a lot of three-dimensional modeling. Rendering Miro is there in the meeting here, and if you want to just chime in a couple of words. Looking at visualizing scenario planning, what's going on. We are all excited about these big projects that may or may not happen along our Fifth Street Bridge and things like. There's a lot of things that are really happening. And one thing is supporting the academic side along with it. And there's a lot of real world data there. Students like you guys have mentioned, students are really appreciative of providing real data as opposed to some example that they keep looking all the time, and they really love. I'm sure all of you have examples of students saying, hey, this project that we worked on with this real data was an opener for me to get a job or something. They were able to demonstrate something. So that's where we are finally getting at, and we're really excited for all these. Jessica, I'm so glad that you're having this data as an asset, as one of those framework committees or whatever. You're going to keep pushing that to gravitate towards the top of administration's lens as much as
just going to be one of those flies that buzzes around, and they keep trying to smack us down, and they keep flying up. Eventually, they'll want to talk to us. That's my theory.
My colleague Miro is here. If I can extension, if Miro would like to say anything. Maybe you stepped out. Thanks, Res, for the.
I'll take this spot if I can. I'm not in your lab, but my name is Paula Gomez, and I work with GTRI in the Machine Learning and Data Analytics branch in ATAS. I'm sorry I came in late to this meeting, but I'm very excited about the topic, and I'll probably watch the recording to give a more, articulated opinion. But we are very interested on this. I did my PhD in computational design and architecture at Georgia Tech. I worked in the Imagine lab with Matt Swartz, that then it joined to your lab, I believe. Matt Swartz is my supervisor now at GTRI. So yeah, thank you for hosting this, and I'll follow up. Thank you.
Yeah, please do, Paula. Please. We keep hearing about these amazing things happening over in GTRI, but aren't always able to stitch it together perfectly. So I would love to hear from you.
Yeah, same here. Thanks.
So I know there's an opening for Mira to jump in. I don't know if Russ is, we may be losing people to Mars, but if Russ is there, I was struck by the notion of people figuring out the value of the data inside the community, and it reminded me of the work that Russ is doing in Savannah with the sea level sensing, that a lot of that is outreach and community engagement around ways of thinking about data that you didn't have before. It's really hard to go to a community and say, hey, you could have this data and it'd be great. So, what is that process? And maybe we need to be doing some of that magic in Savannah. Maybe we need to be doing some of that magic internally to build up kind of community engagement with data collection and data use.
Yeah, that's a good point. It certainly is I would say of the 20 plus core people working in the sea level sensor project at this point, more than half of the team is focused on that community side. And the community engagement, both the K-12 education, the education to the awareness around sea level rise and storm impacts in the community, emergency preparedness, all of the above, and on and on. One example where we're having this conversation a little bit this afternoon with Kim Cobb, professor in Earth and Atmospheric Sciences, who many of you know. We sponsor a VIP team, a student project team, one of the Candida Living Labs project teams, and ours is focused on air quality. So it's undergraduate students interested in this topic. We've deployed a number of purple air sensors around campus, both inside and outside. We're letting the students basically lead. The whole point is for them to lead this research effort, and they're helping decide where should we deploy more sensors, where what's the data telling us, where do we need to have better data. And one of the things that they actually have decided they need to do at this point is they need to understand what our campus community thinks about in terms of air quality on campus. And so they're actually looking, they're putting together a survey and trying to figure out how to reach out to the campus community, both students and staff broadly, from all parts of campus. And just to have that conversation, to start that conversation about, the students know what they think and what makes them think about air quality. And, inevitably, at some point, the conversation mentions getting stuck behind a trolley. But more seriously, COVID, has greatly raised the awareness of in-building air quality, and how widely that varies, based on, any number of factors, and that, people are paying attention to it. And so the students have decided, we've got to do something to try to, measure, take the pulse of what our community's perceptions are of air quality on campus. And perhaps more of an interest on in-building this year than they would have a year ago, right? Which is kind of interesting. So, that's one example of, it's helping people understand the value of this data goes way beyond just a string of numbers, right? It's what's the impact, what's what action can I take if now that I know this information, how's it going to help me? Those kinds of things are where we need to lift up for the community.
And Russ, I've
Talk
heard
about,
this from other smart
go
city
ahead.
projects, this notion that 50% is technology and 50% is the people side, which makes iPad happy. But Jessica,
Yeah,
I mean,
I
I
don't
hate.
take it personally that my part keeps getting diminished. I just feel like, it's just like why does my part keep getting smaller? But yeah, I guess that's how it is.
Jessica, I'm afraid of making the price tag of what we're proposing look more, but it might help to remind people that, the resources associated with, having data be an asset on campus, includes these kind of people, community building, use building resources. It's not just
Right.
the data and the tech. But if we don't
Right.
invest in both sides, then we're not going to see that long-term value.
Yeah, well, and that's how we get to the point where Jessica doesn't have to explain it to someone every year or every 6 months
Yeah.
and re-explain it and re-explain it, right? And I mentioned the article from President Cabrera yesterday. I was thrilled to see a paragraph mention it, right? I mean, the instrumentation of eco-commons, is elevated, and it has been a critical, focus of that project. Now it's on us to make good on it, and because a year from now people are going to ask, so what have you learned? And how do we use the data? And so but yeah, absolutely.
And so for anyone who doesn't know, Russ was a huge value partner for facilities. We weren't sure how to go about it. We weren't sure if we should be using, hobo sensors and connecting through a regular network, or, how did we want to really make this thing come to life? And so because members of IPAT have been so helpful in so many other areas over time, and we've had such good partnership, I reached out to Russ, and he came over and told us all about LoRaWAN and all about this amazing opportunity to simplify the process and maybe take some of the challenges around firewalls and, is there internet out in the middle of that field, off of the table, because we are in the middle of a city, so these gateways can connect. So that's been a great learning opportunity for us, because now I'm questioning, as the analytics person in facilities, how else should we be leveraging LoRaWAN? Like, what else is possible? Given the communication challenges I'm dealing with some of the sensors I'm dependent on in the field around utilities that are breaking all the time, and there's 5 different jumps before I get to my data, and it's just such a nightmare. So when I see the simplicity and the elegance of something like LoRaWAN, I'm like, okay, how can we apply this? So that hopefully was going to continue to grow to be a great opportunity on multiple fronts, but we want to do more, and make it better and help interpret these opportunities. So we are down to our last 7 or 8 minutes of this call. So I want to, I guess, open it back up to Beth, Matt, anybody who's been leading up to this point, if you have any additional questions or comments, and then anybody else who's been a part of this, if you have follow-ups or things that you want to make sure we're thinking about as part of this discussion, now's your chance.
So I saw Scott had an IoT question for the group, so I'm curious about that. And then I think Matt's got a question about who wants to volunteer for a follow-up interview or data collection. So both of those are in the queue. So Scott, I'm curious to know what the IoT question is.
Yeah, so today's topic is about campus operational data, and a lot of what I've tried to use, my colleague John Liu is on this meeting too, is data put in by facilities to measure the infrastructure, whether that's like metering or that's like measuring the conditions in a space, humidity, temperature, whatever. And that's kind of a very kind of energy system focus. But we've increasingly been interested in deploying our own sensing to like verify what gets put in by facilities, because sometimes just the easiest way to kind of check it is to get our own device, plop it in there, kind of make sure that we believe what we're seeing from facilities. We don't have to do that too often, but my point is that this involves some sort of deployment of IoT. It would be putting a sensor in a space, and if that becomes more granular, two things. How should campus researchers be managing just the deployment of those? And it's actually, so far, it's just been for A&F purposes to help with model calibration and such. But it becomes the Wild West potentially of just sort of sticking sensors up anywhere. So I'm not sure if there's kind of a general resource for knowing the right thing to do. And I know there's review boards and such, but not even really talking about like a scientific purpose necessarily. So that's the first part. And the second part is if that could be used to infer occupancy or things that are more on the human side of things, even if it's not really measuring people, but like CO2 or temperature, right? Those could be used to infer people-oriented stuff. So I'm not sure where the line is, like who I would report this or get approval from, and it's very interesting to me. And so we're kind of impinging on that people space more often, whether it, intentionally or not. But so two big questions is, where can I put IoT? Who would I ask? And second is, what is the line to, being too close to people and privacy and things like that?
Matt, I'm interested in what you have to say about this, because I can tell you people ask me all the time. And I
Yeah,
have a method I use, but it's probably not the appropriate method.
right. Well, no, I mean, I think so. I'm really glad you brought this up because I don't think that we've in the work that we've done so far on the task force, I don't think we've really thought about the connection between this and instrumentation. And I think it's interesting. Certainly, Russ and I have thought about this a lot over the years. I remember when we did, we actually had Wi-Fi on the buses that we did, and we were very close to we were trying to figure out how to essentially propose an idea of allowing for a space on the buses for instrumenting researchers wanting to put different types of devices. We didn't call it IoT back then, but just a cage with network connectivity so that people could do different types of sensing, whether it was air quality or people counters or things like that. So I think there is an overlap here. The privacy issue ultimately is really about the data more so than it is the device. But I'm not aware of a process to go through, and I think everything is ad hoc. And I'll also say that it's an incredibly complex space to work in because having deployed some sensors where there was a company involved, right? I've done this a couple times. I'll just say there's plenty of loopholes where privacy doesn't get considered, and really should, right? In terms of what devices we put on, light poles or in spaces on the campus. So it's a good question. I don't have an answer. I think you've just convinced me that we need to make sure that we address this because there's a lot of there's a lot of overlap here, and I think you're connecting the dots and saying this is actually important because if we get operational data, we also will need to be able to deploy infrastructure to instrument validating and verifying that information or adding to it. And so there's a connection there that's really hard to ignore. I think that's great.
There's the intentionality of it. One of the ideas I had early on in the EcoCommons design was like, let's measure out, I don't know, distances, have certain things available at certain feet so people can connect instrumentation.
Mm-hmm.
It never, I wasn't in enough design meetings, I guess, and didn't speak loudly enough to get it to happen, but that people are always coming to me wanting to put up more sensors in different places, but then they need electricity or they need Wi-Fi or they need this or they need that.
Right.
And then it's like, well, what are you doing with that data? And have you gotten through FERPA? And, because I can't that's not really my job, but I have to let them know, like, this could be another
Yep.
area you need to look into, which is why I'm so thankful for the framework portion of the task force organization, which I need to schedule that next meeting. But because I think that's the vital part is like, what are the different questions that need to be asked and who needs to be approved. But you're right. I've had situations too where cell phone companies have come to us and wanted to put things in different places in Georgia Tech, and depending on relationships and the development group and all kinds of interesting political things that I never would have thought were part of the discussion became a part of the discussion. So it goes wide and deep, and the parameters that probably need to exist to give us some rails, because I know Honeywell is desperately trying to get into our space for our buildings, and they're pitching all kinds of interesting ideas to our executives. I already know all the challenges, but at these high levels, when they're making political partnership, they don't always think in those terms. So yeah, the research versus the partnerships, it's the layers keep going.
Yeah.
We're just about out of time. Any final thoughts from anybody? David, you've been very quiet. David Leonard.
Sorry, I wanted to listen.
David's on the task force, by the way, folks. So I'm always picking on him.
So I'll just, Beth, I put something in the chat, but essentially I just want to invite everyone to reach out to any of us on the task force, David, Beth, Jessica, Scott. I can't see everybody, so I'm not sure who else is on, but those are the folks that I can see. Reach out to us. Also, if you know of folks who maybe have talked about, could I get access to this type of data, or maybe they've tried. I would love to hear some success stories. I think building out what we know of what has worked is really helpful, and I know, despite we've got good experiences on our team, I know that there's a lot of ad hoc relationships that have been built up over the years where people do have access to data because of partnerships and the value they've created between them. So it'd be good to kind of unearth some more of those so that we can make sure we consider them. So other than that, I don't have anything else. I think appreciate everyone's time.
And I just
I'll
want
follow
to
up with. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to repeat my request for examples from other places that are doing this well, other universities, or from industry. Because if industry is doing this, we're training up our students to go get those great jobs, right? And it also shows kind of where the research edge, the research horizon is. So, people operate out of fear and greed. So a little bit of competitive fear doesn't hurt in the report as well. I don't really believe that part, but it's been mentioned to me a lot of times. So.
David, I'm remembering a few times over the years seeing occasionally a session on this at either an EDUCAUSE or a Internet 2 conference that would include some of these topics we've talked about. Never a big. I'm trying to remember. I think Arizona State was one that seemed to be all in on this type of thing the last time I saw a presentation. But I'll also say they seem to be all in on some vendor's product to do it, not as a core research infrastructure. So there's a lot of that as well.
I was just going to follow up to Matt. I know you guys are out of time, but I will follow up with I have a success story that might be of interest. It's actually around student data. I was able to get the students from the last 10 years who graduated Georgia Tech, all their transcripts. This is for a curricular analytics project. It's with anonymized, synthetic IDs, which helped. We had to get an IRB, even though it was maybe not required, but we went ahead. It wasn't that hard to get. So that's for a curricular analytics project that someone's doing that I'm helping with. But and then I have another story around a project that got stuck by COVID. So I'll share a couple of data war stories if you buy me a virtual beer.
Deal. Happy to do it.
I think we can deliver beer now. I think Georgia, you're allowed to deliver beer. Maybe I can get you a real one.
Sounds like a good idea.
I know I can't use state funds to do it, but
No, you cannot. All right, guys, I have another thing I have to jump over to, but I really enjoyed the conversation. Please do follow up
Thank
with
you,
us.
Jessica.
Yeah, thank you all. We're going to keep pushing forward and make this a reality. You know, it doesn't happen unless you have a vision and you go after it. So I'm looking forward to working with everybody. Thanks. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
Jessica. Thank you, Vin.
Bye-bye.
You.
Cheers.
Bye.